Today marks 1 year since a wildfire swept into Fort McMurray, forced the entire population to leave their homes and to try to get to safety. Well, today, every person in Fort McMurray has a story. I was there recently and spoke with some of the people who have come back to see how they're doing 1 year later. Take me back to May 3rd, 2016. What happened that day?
I had a teacher who was on supervision for the second half of the recess call and say, "There's smoke billowing up in the sky. What's going on? Do you have any information for us?" So in a matter of minutes, everything changed for us that day.
At about noon, we were working on a project together, and one of my colleagues here at the Mediwake sent me an image of what was happening up on the hill. And at first I didn't understand what she was sending me, to be perfectly honest. Then she sent another one. And she said two words with that image: happening now.
That day, my staff contacted me, and it was sort of a day of chaos.
And I said, "Son, you need to kind of get grounded. I don't want you to panic, but this is an emergency. I've been told Fort McMurray's on fire."
It was an absolute inferno. And then we started hearing that certain areas of the community were under mandatory evacuation, and we knew then that it was really real.
And he looked out our window, and his comment was, basically, "Mom, I don't just see smoke, I see flames as high as trees."
It is very emotional. There was so much happening on that day.
What I understand now, I didn't understand it then, but Beacon Hill was totally on fire. And there was this wall of fire, so the traffic came to an absolute halt. Nobody was coming back into the community, nothing was moving. So we were forced then to turn around and evacuate south. And that was, for me, the trauma of the situation was having to go in the opposite direction of my family, and that was really hard.
It took several hours to get out of downtown. And during that time, we could hear on the bus all the areas of town that were on mandatory evacuation. That was the hardest part for me, not knowing if I was going to be able to get to my own children. And I still had 2 students that I was caring for from the school. When we drove through town that night, the children saw on the side of the road fires still burning in the ditches. As we went up Beacon Hill, they could see there's a motel on the side of the road that was still burning. So they saw that as we went through town. So we were able to reunite both children with their parents. So one child was reunited with his mother on basically the 3rd day.
Right.
And the second child was reunited on the 4th day.
Wow. When you came back and you saw Fort McMurray and the damage that had been done, what did you think?
It's hard actually to put in words. It was surreal, seeing all the blackened trees.
Teresa, was your home affected in the fire?
It was. We lived up in the area of Epicent. My husband and I lost our home and our vehicle as well. It's like our street didn't even exist anymore. And it looked almost like, to me, like what you see on TV with a war zone, everything with concrete and stuff pulled out.
When the fire hit Fort McMurray, it triggered the largest evacuation in Canadian history. Almost 90,000 people forced to pick up and leave, and they left not knowing what they'd be coming back to. When they returned a month later, 15% of their city structures had been destroyed. Most of that number were people's homes. Now, the cost of rebuilding is also expected to be record-breaking, more than $5 billion. But the emotional costs are a lot harder to measure.
Every single person has a different set of emotions related to that day. No 2 stories are going to be the same. I think the thing that people need the most is mental health supports. Our agencies that work in the mental health field have reported extraordinary numbers of people needing help. And we heard a figure early on by the summer of last year after the fire that mental health referrals were up over 1,000% over the previous year.
Wow.
And as a community, we have to be there for each other and also just be mindful of one another. You know, some of our colleagues may be having a bad day, and that might be the thing that's causing that. And I think there is a high level of understanding about that in our community.
How are your students coping?
Our students are doing really well. I'm amazed all the time at the resiliency of children. There are times when something will trigger a child.
Like what?
We had a situation where we had a guest come in and do some science experiments, and just lighting a lighter and the flame from that triggered a child. And so we have 2 counselors on staff, and so we call in a counselor, and they're excellent. They come in and they help the child work through whatever it is that's bothering them.
How are you managing now?
You know, it's getting better, and as the more and more I share my story, not just my own personal story, but the story about our Indigenous people, it's becoming less difficult to tell the story. I don't well up as much as I used to, and it's just been really good how this fire has. Although the impacts have been devastating for many parts of the community, our Indigenous people have just come together and banded together so strongly, and our little friendship center has become an important part of this recovery and reentry process, which I'm so very proud of.
When you look back, what do you remember? What sticks with you now?
I'm so proud of our city. There's so much focus on the actual anniversary date. I want to remind people to look out for what happens after the anniversary date. You might be so steeled and so prepared for, okay, I've got to know, I've got to be on my guard, I've got to be mindful. Don't forget to be mindful after, because it might happen that when you have your first fire pit, you're triggered. It might be, we have electrical storms here all the time, multiple of them, and some, I mean, they're beautiful to watch, but that could be problematic. So that is normal for Fort McMurray. We get a lot of them, and we've never had a fire to the magnitude of what we just had. We all know it's been coined the beast. But when people now see a storm cloud or hear the sound of the lightning or the thunder, that's going to be scary, and especially for children. So it might not be on the anniversary date all the triggers happen, but it could come as we go into our summer and as the spring comes and our trees don't fill out. We're not going to have this beautiful forest surrounding us like we did before. And I guess for people to deliberately focus on what is there, not what isn't.
I want to thank the town of Fort McMurray for giving us one of the warmest welcomes I've ever had. Plus, a big thank you to Russell Thomas, Linda Sovani, Mary Ray Mistopoulos, and Teresa Nawagabo for sharing their experiences with us.